Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. This video is titled Cherry Picking Season Arrives in Greenland. They had 3 days of mild weather in Greenland earlier this week, and the usual cast of clowns announced a climate emergency. Eric Holthaus, yesterday was the warmest day in recorded history on the Greenland ice sheet. Today is the biggest melt day. More than 12 billion tons of water will have entered the ocean by tonight, permanently raising sea levels. We're in a climate emergency. And there's Eric's climate emergency right there. They lost 12 billion tons of ice in 1 day in Greenland. That sounds really bad. How'll they ever get that back? And Eric said sea level has been permanently raised. But wait a minute. If we look over here to last November, Greenland gained 22 billion tons of snow in 2 days. On 1 day they got 10 billion tons, and the next day they got 12 billion tons. And there are lots of other days when they got 8 billion tons of snow in 1 day. So 12 billion tons of ice loss in 1 day sounds really bad if you're not familiar with the numbers and you take it out of context. In about 3 weeks, Greenland will start rapidly accumulating snow again. The water will evaporate out of the ocean and fall on Greenland's surface in huge dumps, up to 12 billion tons in 1 day. So Eric's claim that the ice is permanently lost from Greenland is just complete nonsense. Greenland's surface gains a lot more snow every year than melts off of it. I'm going to show this to you in a minute. In 1942, during World War II, this P-38 military aircraft was forced down by bad weather onto Greenland. Over the next 70 years, it got buried under hundreds of feet of new snow. But the aircraft was recently located, dug out, and restored. The point being that Greenland's surface gains a huge amount of snow every year. But facts and reality don't make any difference to climate alarmists. Rolling Stone, Greenland is melting away before our eyes. The Guardian, heat waves amplify near record levels of ice melt in northern hemisphere. Associated Press, walloped by heat wave, Greenland sees massive ice melt. Inside Climate News, Greenland's melting, heat waves are changing the landscape before their eyes. And here's the graph from the Danish Meteorological Institute. The blue line shows the surface mass balance in Greenland this year. This gray line shows the median from 1981 to 2010, and this blue range is what's considered normal. You can see that this year is at the low end of the normal range. But even so, there's still been 250 billion more tons of accumulation than melt. And the melt season will rapidly slow down and probably end in a couple weeks. And to put this in perspective, the previous 2 years had very high levels of snow accumulation. 2017 and 2018 were far above normal. This year is below normal. But if you look at the mass balance over the last 3 years, there's actually been about 150 billion tons of accumulation above normal during the 3-year period. This is the weather data for the center of the Greenland ice sheet for the past month. You can see that current temperature is minus 10 C or 14 F. Not a lot of melting going on at that temperature. And if you look over here, we can see the 3-day heat wave, which alarmists are hysterical about. Temperatures in the center of the Greenland ice sheet got up to freezing for 3 days, but have since dropped back down again. This is a webcam image from last night when it was minus 15 C or 5 F. If these journalists were actually in Greenland at minus 15 C, they probably wouldn't be complaining about the heat. But they maintain their fantasies from fossil fuel-powered, climate-controlled offices thousands of miles away. Here's the forecast for next Wednesday in Greenland. Minus 4 F in the center of the ice sheet. That's pretty cold. These short heat waves have become a favorite cherry pick of climate alarmists. Here's another event they got hysterical about last week. There were 4 days of hot weather in Paris. The red line shows Paris temperatures during the summer of 2019, and the blue line shows Paris temperatures during the summer of 1947. As you can see, the 2 summers were almost identical. Paris got a little bit hotter this year than 1947, but not by a huge amount, and recently it's cooled way down in Paris. And I'm a little bit suspicious about this top reading. It's a couple degrees higher than what the French Meteorological Agency has reported. But it doesn't make any difference. The temperature takes huge swings from day to day, and the minor differences between this year and 1947 show that global warming had nothing to do with the heat wave. But Greenland isn't the only hysterics going on with the press about the Arctic. Here are some more stories. The Arctic is on fire, and these images from space show the choking smoke. The Arctic is ablaze. Arctic fires, you have to go to a different planet to find a more persistent type. Are we watching the Arctic pass a tipping point this summer? Scary stuff, a tipping point. The planet's just about to fall apart. But if we look in the historical record, we of course see a completely different story. Here's a story from the Cincinnati Enquirer, August 1st, 1921. Heat wave, severest in 20 years. Chicago passes 1,000 degree excess temperature mark. Even Alaska is sweltering. Washington, July 31st. The heat wave that has held the United States continually in discomfort since June 1st, that's 2 months, also has overspread during that period practically all countries in the northern temperate zone, and the hot spell probably has been the most intense in 20 years. Even Alaska in these torrid days would afford but slight relief, Professor Mitchell said. For as far as the Arctic Circle, the mercury has ranged throughout the last 60 days around 75 degrees and upwards as high as 80 degrees. He said this almost is unprecedented and is due to causes for which there is no scientific explanation. At Nome, Alaska, and other cities and towns in that zone, the thermometer has shown readings not much lower than the 75-degree mark for 2 months. This unusual atmospheric condition in the far northwest, Professor Mitchell said, probably explains why the United States today is sweltering, and why other countries in Western Europe and Asia are experiencing unusually high temperatures for this season of the year. Well, the United States is not sweltering this year. In fact, January through July has been the coolest on record in the United States. The average afternoon temperature in the United States this year has been just over 61 degrees, down about 7 degrees from 2012 and from 1934. Here's another story about the Arctic from August 2nd in 1901. Disastrous forest fires in Norway and Sweden, valuable timber destroyed. The destructive forest fires, which were recently reported to be raging in Sweden and Norway, still defy all efforts to get them under control. In Sweden, forests covering 20 square miles are on fire, and timber valued at many thousands of pounds has been destroyed. And another story from September 30th, 1927. Women motorists, Arctic and Australian trips. To drive by the light of the midnight sun, to race for life through forest fires caused by storm lightning, to be 15 hours at a time at the wheel, and to be caught in an Arctic heat wave and tormented by mosquitoes in what is known to us as the land of eternal snows were among the recent experiences of an intrepid Englishwoman, Mrs. Victor Bruce, who accompanied her husband and a companion in a 6,000-mile motor tour through the Arctic zone. Through Belgium, Holland, Germany, Denmark, Lapland, and Finland, the motor party journeyed to 270 miles north of the Arctic Circle, prepared for freezing weather. To their continued astonishment, the temperature was never less than 90 degrees in the shade. That's 32 C. The intention was to reach the Arctic Ocean, but 40 miles of marsh country, i.e. melted permafrost, on the coast prevented this. An average of 210 miles a day was made on the journey, which was arduous in the extreme, and at one time the car had an actual race with death among the forest fires in Sweden over the terrible roads. And here's another story from 1937, a hot story from the Arctic. Weather stations on the Yukon River in the Arctic have reported temperatures of more than 100 degrees in the shade. And here's a kid in 1927 sunbathing near the North Pole. The short summers of the Arctic are very warm, and this youngster sitting in the sunlight needs no protection from the cold. This picture was taken as near to the North Pole as Panama is to the equator. So warm weather and fires in the Arctic is nothing new, but what is new is the mindless hysterics of climate alarmists in the press. Their beliefs about climate are based entirely on ignorance about history. They look at ordinary day-to-day events which have been occurring for centuries and say, wow, this is the worst ever, we're having a tipping point, we're all going to die. Why call them climochondriacs? A hypochondriac looks at a perfectly ordinary condition and gets very fearful about it, and climochondriacs do exactly the same thing. Climate alarmists have an infantile mentality when they imagine that the world is supposed to look like this. Many people these days are raised on ignorance and fantasy, which makes them ripe targets for climate alarmists. And climate alarmists seem to have the intellectual and emotional maturity of 2-year-olds. Anyway, I attended the House Climate Crisis Committee's first public hearing yesterday, which was held right here in Boulder, Colorado. I don't think I've ever been surrounded by that many crazy people before in one place in my life. And the committee chairman started out talking about how great it was that so many people were participating in government. Only problem is we weren't allowed to participate. They had a very clear policy that no public comment was allowed. Apparently for Democrats, public participation means shut up and listen to our propaganda. But possibly the most disappointing part of the hearing was from Representative Garrett Graves, a Republican from Louisiana. He's generally a pretty good guy, but his climate alarmism pandering was just absolutely off scale. He was trying to blame subsidence along the Louisiana coast on climate change. He went on and on about how Louisiana is losing land, and we have to stop it, and we have to stop this climate change. Louisiana is losing land for reasons which have nothing to do with sea level or climate change. The land is just sinking. It's scary to think that this kind of garbage is the best we can get from the Republican Party. Anyway, climate alarmists get really upset when I point out that melting, heat waves, and fires in the Arctic is nothing new. And the reason they get upset is because they don't care about the Arctic, they don't care about the climate. What climate alarmists seek is power and control, and they're using climate hysteria as the vehicle to obtain that power. So if I do things to damp down climate hysteria, they get very angry with me. For me, this whole thing is a fascinating study in mass hysteria and delusion, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science, propaganda, and organized crime for a long time.